Welcome to The Audience Connection. This is the podcast where we focus on how businesses can create content that builds more genuine connections with their audience.
Each episode, we dive into the art and science of storytelling, speaking with the sharpest minds in brand, marketing, and creative storytelling.
Our guests share their strategies, insights, and creative choices that made their audiences care.
Brought to you by Casual, the video partner for global brands. With offices in the US, EMEA, and APAC,
Casual leverages the art and science behind creating impactful stories to drive business results for their clients.
we're your hosts. I'm Lydia Chan.
And I'm Ollie Atkinson. This is The Audience Connection.
Hi, and welcome back to The Audience Connection and the last episode for 2025. Today, we're diving into what it really takes to create standout brand storytelling inside B2B tech. And our guest, Kristen Souders, brings a genuinely unique perspective. She leads the global brand and content studio at Hitachi Vantara, and she has this rare ability to turn deeply technical ideas into stories that feel human, cinematic, and emotionally resonant.
Yeah, and we know from working with a lot of technical clients, this is definitely a difficult thing to do. I really enjoyed this convo with Kristen because she just keeps it real and has a deep passion for making sure creative standards still have a seat at the table. I mean, especially now in this day and age where, I think creative is being truly undervalued.
Yeah, there's so much conversation around that at the moment. And Kristen shares that B2B audiences absolutely will engage with emotional storytelling as long as they feel seen and not sold to, which I completely agree with. And the key is understanding this particular audience, because the IT audience is smart but completely overloaded and often allergic to fluff. And she breaks down how to creatively balance all of that.
For sure. And we also dig into how this IT audience is evolving, the role of taste in creative leadership, how failure shapes great creatives, and also what AI means for the next generation of talent trying to build their own POV when creating for this particular audience.
Yeah, and I love her take on AI. And, on AI, she said that algorithms can replicate patterns, but they can't replicate perspective. And I think that frames this entire episode perfectly. So with that, let's get into Lydia's conversation with Kristen.
Kristen, it's great to have you on the show. So Kristen is a creative executive with extensive experience in brand strategy, storytelling, and team building. She's currently the Senior Director of Global Brand and Content Studio over at Hitachi Vantara, a global technology company that helps businesses unlock the power of their data. So Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Lydia. It's great to be here.
It's amazing to have you. I'm really excited to dive into really how your approach to storytelling and how to identify the right creatives to do so. But first, let's start with you, a brief background on how you got into this world of creative leadership and what led you to where you are now.
Really, I'm a creative leader and storyteller. And over the last decade, I've been leading global brand and content studios inside B2B tech companies, building in-house creative teams that operate with soul and speed of agency, but with more of the intimacy of an insider being in-house. And my focus has always been in translating complex, often very technical ideas into stories that feel human, cinematic, and emotionally resonate with audiences. And the funny thing is that I actually started it out in film and video production, which probably explains why I'm a little obsessed with the craft and emotion behind every brand story.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not watching this on YouTube, Kristen has an amazing kind of background of cameras, in on her shelves. So you can tell that she's a filmmaker at heart. So Kristen, yeah, as you said, your work is about taking complex and really technical content and for you guys, think about data infrastructure, cloud tech, right? And really transforming it into stories that actually connect with people. So, for our audience, let's identify who these people are, right? We're a show about audience connection, and the core thing is really understanding your connection. So, who is the core audience for the content that you create?
Yeah. So in the data infrastructure space, it's really data leaders, it's IT professionals, practitioners, it's the C-suite, which is CIOs, CTOs, and as well as data architects. So really that entire group of people of, the IT storage and IT infrastructure buyer is really who we're marketing to.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? When people think about this type of audience group, they think really technical, right? Like really maybe left brain sort of content focus. But from your experience, what type of content do they actually engage with, right? And why?
Yeah.
It does maybe more like emotive storytelling actually connect with this audience too. Like, are we, missing that part of it?
It's really a mix. And so depending on who you're speaking to, right? So if you're talking to CIOs, then you're talking about thought leadership content. You're looking at what's the latest that's happening within infrastructure and data storage, but also through cost and analysis. If you're talking to IT practitioners like IT directors and managers, it's really about, what does it do? How is it going to make my life easier? How am I going to get my weekends back? And then, it's kind of the whole mix in between. But I'd say overall, the audience is one that is smart, that has a lot on their plate as IT budgets shrink and teams start to shrink with automation, but they've got to do more. And so, in that respect, they're allergic to fluff. And I think that that's a really important aspect of it is that, but you've still got to make it compelling. So there are interesting subcultures that exist within the IT space and the IT audiences. And it's about tapping into that and not doing it in a way that feels fluffy or over marketing. They definitely want something that has sizzle and polish at times, but other times it's like, let's just get into the guts of what we're doing and what we're selling or what the problems that we're solving.
Mm, I I really want to dive deeper into the fluff, right? They're allergic to the fluff. I mean, to a certain extent, I'm allergic to fluff.
Yeah.
But I love engaging stories, right? And when told really well, it really pulls you in and it latches into your memory. So um I don't know. Let's unpack that a little bit, right? Like how like maybe give some examples of uh what, you know, isn't fluff or when fluff works. I mean, yeah, whatever route you want to take that.
I think people assume just overall that B2B audiences don't care about creativity. They just have zero tolerance for a lot of noise, which is, I think, what we're seeing today. For the IT audience that we serve, they'll engage when they feel seen, not sold to. And I think that that's a really important differentiation. And so there's a lot of play that you can have there, depending on, again, the level of the audience that you're talking to, whether you're talking to C-suite or whether you're talking to practitioner. So this is something that we like to explore. Some of the things that we've found, the IT audience is also changing and evolving in a wonderful way around diversity, especially. I've been in this space for around 10 years. And, the traditional model was it was, kind of older white guys that that ran the data centers. That has changed. And it's really fantastic to be able to see that. And the way that I've personally seen that is through user conferences, through the different companies I've worked for. As we've gone ahead and put these conferences together and bring people out, you see that shift and that change. And that allows for a much bigger space to be able to tell story, to be able to curate both from a generational aspect, as far as, there's definitely, a vintage flair that can happen, or what I call vintage, which if you're looking at like 80s, 90s pop type culture pieces, but also your geos. So, you've got a really large IT audience in India, for example, and what's going to resonate with them is very different than what's going to resonate in the US or in the UK. So it's an exciting space to be in, as data is somewhat of the lifeblood right now, and so it's really exciting to see those changes.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I love that you talked about just how segmented like we can get, right, with our different types of audiences. And I think what I've found is still this kind of mindset of, hey, let's produce a piece of content that talks to everyone. And how do we advocate for, hey, if we're talking to, XYZ in this geo, we need to put the time and budget and consideration in making specific content for them. And then here's another specific content for this group, right? Versus, because it's always a budget conversation, but, I think people don't realize that actually it's an outcome and a mindset conversation. And how do we move towards that versus thinking about budget first, perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really about what's the story you're wanting to tell, but even before that, it's what's the for a business, what's the problem you're solving?
Yeah.
And so figuring out, for the brand, what that differentiation is, and then being able to build story around that. And then from there, if you've got a strong story and you're telling something compelling, then you can go ahead and create different facets. And those facets might be geo, those facets might be C-suite versus practitioner versus channel partner. That's a really interesting triangle that happens a lot. And then there's times where you have to be like, no, I need to protect the integrity of this piece of storytelling, and it is only for this type of audience or this subset. And then, you know what, we can go create this over here because we're not talking to these folks over here, and we need to create something there. So it's really about that level of understanding what's right for whom, and then building upon that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a great segue in talking about, good creative, right? How do we cultivate and even define, right, what good taste and good creative is?
Oh, it's so subjective,
Yeah.
especially in this time and space. And so I think at the end of the day, for me, it my point of view is that it's about good taste. And taste really comes from a couple different things, right? It comes from exposure and being able to have exposure to a lot of different type of art, and experiences, lived experiences, friendships. And then it also comes from failure and being able to try to build and fail. And that is one of the greatest teachers I've found, in my career so far. So it's about, building that and just kind of continuing to build upon that type of experience to bring that forth in the work.
No, for sure. And I guess, in your role as a leader, how do you approach finding, the right talent, right? That has the right taste for the particular, brand that you're trying to create content for.
Finding the right talent is a process. And, it's one of those things where there's certain levels of it that you can definitely teach depending on, what the role is. But I think that it's about a person's ability to edit, to be able to bring the message through. Do I understand the idea? Do I understand the point of view? Is this technically proficient? That's a really important one. I think especially in this time and space where we're just kind of like learning things quickly and doing that technical prowess that comes forth. And again, that comes forth through building and failing and then building again and having different mentors and inspirations. And so for me, as I look at it as a leader, I'm one of the milestones on the path for creatives to go through and to be able to build through. When it comes to the matter of taste, which is something that I do believe in, which sounds probably a little can rub people wrong, right? But my
Yeah.
view is that taste isn't elitism; it's empathy with standards. And so I think that the more that we dive into the world of AI specifically, it's really about bringing forth that taste level. And each person's taste is going to be different, and that's what actually makes it really cool. Because it's one of those things where you've got standards, and those standards attract and detract. And so that's where, as creative leaders, we need to see what does the brand need, and where's the brand at right now, and how do we bring the right stories forward, and then how do we curate and cultivate that in a way that makes sense to our audience.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the AI conversation because that's where well, where my brain was headed as well as you know you were speaking. Um, because what we learn as filmmakers and content creators, we learn through experience, right? And like you said, like what has worked, what hasn't, being in the industry for decades, really, right, between us. And my concern with AI is that it is, to a certain extent, removing that experience for, say, kind of like the entry level folks, right? And I'm really curious to see how that changes the way people approach creative.
I'm with you on that. I feel the same way. There is a part of me that wants to see a tactile revolution where
Yeah.
we just go completely into hands on, pen and paper. Let's go and let's build. But I know that that's a utopian dream. um, but it is something that I think, I've got kids. I'm a boy mom, and I've got a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. And it's amazing to me to see them just pick it up. My son uses Blender all the time. He uses CapCut. He's putting things together. He's shooting stuff on his phone. And it's one of those things where I love being able to see the way in which he's putting some of these things together. Now, this isn't AI specific, but it's still adjacent to it in the access, the democratization of the tools of video in particular has been massive. And so what many of us normally went to film school for, or took film intensive courses is readily available, right? Um, but the ability to be able to collaborate, and I think that that's the thing as I bring it back to AI, the collaboration with others is really where you learn how to be a better professional, a better person, a better communicator. And so that's where it's going to get really interesting, because oftentimes AI can be, when we're talking about creativity in AI, it can be a very singular siloed process depending on the situation. Not always, right? But I think that this is where I think community is really important as we continue, as we look at the younger generation and being able to show their work, receive critique in a valuable way, and be able to say, hey, what is it about this that's resonated with me? And where does this feel like a mimic? And where does this, right? It's that whole process. And so in some ways,
Yeah.
I guess I'm coming back around to the standards are still the same. The tools are changing and shifting. But at the same time, at the end of the day, we all got to get out and touch grass. And I think that that's a really important part of the process so that we're not creating just this like AI work slop, as it's being called, and this kind of sludge. So I'm excited about the future of what's possible. But I also want to be able to bring back to people and to the younger generations that are doing this, the tactile nature. I want them to be able to understand what these cameras are. I want
Yeah.
them to be able to understand the feel of, the smell of fixer and
Yeah.
the feel of film. And because I think actually they'd get super excited about it. I know I've just tangented. I
No, no, no.
rattled,
I think
but
it
that's
was
like,
a it was a great tangent. I mean, I think that I think the more anything steers in one direction, the
Mhm.
more people find joy and love in the other direction, right? And you mentioned AI slop. So I think truly kind of human led, human made content is going to, if anything, come at a premium, right? With AI also to a certain extent, making everything look quite similar, then you've kind of broken one of the laws of marketing, which is differentiation, right? So, I think it's pulling us in one direction, but also going to pull us back in a different direction. One of the things that you mentioned that I want to touch a bit more on as well is touching grass, but also touching it with people, right? It's this whole building community and then having a really good feedback loop. When we talk about creating really effective teams, right? So what I found was, you know, folks need to really be in environments with other people and understand how to critically think about um, finding solutions for a piece of feedback, right? And I think we're losing that a bit with, being able to just type in a question or type in a directive into ChatGPT. Instead of using your mind to really critically think about, okay, what's going to make this edit a bit more emotive? What's going to solve this stakeholder's feedback, right? But in a creative way that drives better engagement within the video, the content that you're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's also no better adrenaline rush than being able to have what I call a hive mind with other people, oftentimes with creatives, with creative teams that I lead. That's one of my favorite outcomes is to be able for all of us to kind of put different work together, show it. Some of it's come through, AI generation or efficiency models for sure, but being able to have uh, that feedback loop, as you've said, is an exciting it is an exciting experience, especially then when you put it into market or you share it with the audience that it's intended for, because then you get to see how is it resonating. And then to do that with a group of people and for that data to come back and then each person's going to interpret that a little bit differently, then it's like it's going to be able to build upon in a way that's going to further the storytelling. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think it is something that is really important, and I think that it's one of those things where, you know, I think with what you were sharing, when it becomes safe and generic, and I think generic is what we're mostly afraid of as creatives, is the white noise that's happening that,
Yeah.
we see, and it's like everybody knows the look of Midjourney,
Yeah.
right? And that's okay because I feel like that now becomes a point in time, right? It's like when, certain types of filters came out in Final Cut and Premiere and like you had these like certain types of looks, they become a point in time. And so the question is really around, well, was the story good? Because at the end of the day, what I've learned over time, I was so caught up in the aesthetics of something and, oh, it needs to look this way and it needs to be this way. And that can be true, but it's really about the truth of the storytelling. Am I telling a compelling story? That's always going to win over any of this. And so the compelling story, which oftentimes is the simplest, is the one that will always cut through to the soul.
A lot of our work involves, people who are in the stories, right? And being able to bring, you know, that to life. And it doesn't always have to mean bring out the best cameras, the best lenses, the best lighting. If anything, you want to come at it pretty light because you don't want to detract from them telling their truths and like feeling comfortable and being able to also be nimble and capture the visuals that are also needed to tell that story and not have to do it over like 5 days, right? You can do that over a day now. And the way you structure that story and put it together is going to lead to how effective it is, not, again, not all the money that you spent kind of putting it together.
And that's the human experience because those moments, whether you're shooting something and you're getting something unexpected, a moment, an outtake that actually makes it in, those unexpected moments and the way that you can structure a story, that's point of view and that's
Yeah.
taste in its
Yep.
own way. And that's something that AI can't replace. They can only show us the patterns. right? Like, so that's, I think, a really important reminder for creatives that are feeling threatened about future technology, because it's really the beauty and the memory is always in the mistakes.
Yeah. No, I like that you bring that up as the last thing you said, because there's an episode, and then maybe I'll remember later which episode it was that Ollie had, but we talk about just like the little mistakes that people make that actually lead to better engagement for the audience, right? Because it makes you look human. I want to go back to the hive mind and the high that teams get when they're just in this amazing kind of brainstorm session. How do you what are the things that you put in place to facilitate that, right? To make sure that that happens and that we carve out time for that, because things are moving so fast. Our teams here at Casual, we have a million projects on at once. We try to get like a creative brainstorm in, but calendars don't fit, yada, 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 right? So how do you, as a creative leader, make sure that that happens?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think, first of all, trust is the most important part. You have to have, the team needs to feel trust to be able to come bring their ideas. And the way that I try to start things off, assuming we've got a brief, that's not always the case either, especially for in-house. Things are just sort of ad hoc at times.
Out of
Um,
house now too.
Out of house too.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, we start with there's no bad ideas. We start out, there's no sacred cows that come into this sort of situation. We're going to just put everything out there and start to work back from, what are the goals and objectives. So creating that feeling for the group allows for expansion. And so I think that, one of those things too is to be able to, as you get to know each other as creatives, understanding where certain people are going to go with the way in which they're going to influence or the stylization that they might bring to the table. And so you start adding to that. And really, it's like a cake. I mean, it's like there's the baseline. I'm trying to bring the base layer, but it's really the rest of the creatives that add to it and bring that together. I think something that's really important for that is also to have time with creatives, for them to be able to show their work, for you to be able to, as a creative leader, to be able to do reviews with them, share with them what you think works, where you think it falls apart, ask them questions around that. Don't just correct their work. Ask them why they made those decisions. These are kind of the basics, but I think it's something that gets lost often in the urgency and the agile, let's move fast, let's just go, go, go. And so oftentimes it can be robotic. And I think that that's where all of a sudden you find yourself just in a place of again, generic thinking. And so I like to be able to have that time weekly with my creatives for them to be able to show me what they're working on, what are the problems they're trying to solve. Oftentimes also, as an in-house leader, a problem that somebody on my video team is solving for, and then one of my writers or on the design team, these are separate projects that often cross-pollinate. And so to be able to connect those dots is really important. And it's one of the things that I do feel that for the teams that I lead, that's a superpower of ours. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. No, I think that's great, that you do find time to do that, right? Because it's hard work, and I can I can
It is.
definitely sympathize with that. So I think that's great. I love to pivot a little bit to we talk about we've said the word generic a lot, right? Throughout this conversation. So what I guess to you, what is a sign that a brand has truly elevated its storytelling, and then what's like a red flag that it's stuck in that generic safe zone?
When it comes to brands being stuck in a safe zone, it is just that. It is pretty generic. It looks like it's probably mimicking its competition, or it's just not standing out. Uh, it it just doesn't have an authentic voice or point of view that is resonating with its audience. And that can happen for a number of different reasons. But I think that the way that I see brands standing out is when they're taking risks. And those don't always have to be bold. It's just more in, is it good storytelling? Is the brand journalism hitting it with the way that they're reacting to some of the topics? And does this feel authentic? And I think that that's really where it comes down for me. When I see a brand taking risk, there's an authenticity to the way that they're telling the story or the way that they're showing up. And it could be something as simple as their LinkedIn feeds just looking cohesive. It can be so many different things, but it's one of those areas that I think is authenticity is so important, and it's really hard to get because I think in order to be authentic, you need to know who you are as a brand, and then your creative team and your product team and your engineering team also need to be able to understand who that is and what that is. And so that's where a lot of times there's tension because product marketing might see things in a totally different way. And so how do you navigate that? And it's really one of those things where you've got to, without being, especially for creative teams, without being seen as an agency of no. That's
Yeah.
something that for in-house teams, they navigate often. I've always found that in, pressures to move fast or to skip discovery or testing, uh, that's where creative leadership really gets tested for a brand. And my instinct is to slow down just a beat to enough to protect the quality and the alignment. And, you can say yes to the outcome, just not to the shortcut of getting there. And so oftentimes I find that what's happening is there's a request for shortcutting. And there's moments where that's okay, but a lot of times it's not because what it's going to do is it's going to paint you into a corner. And so again, that's going to bring you into red flag space over time. And so it's the balance between creative instinct and business urgency that I think the creative leader and the creative teams are under right now.
I guess what is the conversation with the other side, right? With the leadership team, the product team. How do you navigate that balance, that conversation?
It comes back to goals and objectives. And the thing that this is going to sound so business khaki of me, but it's about the racy, who's responsible, who's accountable, and
Yeah.
who's the ultimate decider. And so if we look at, again, what's the objective that we're trying to achieve here? Um, I think you'll find that most leaders, most executives, it makes sense. There's always those times where it's personal, where it's personal. And it's what is that song like? You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to walk away. Hopefully, you never have to run. But it's one of those things where there are moments where you just have to say, "Hey, I'm going to give this up to you. That's fine." In the background, most creative leaders are saying, "Okay, how are we going to work out of that corner?" And that's kind of the job. And so there's a lot again in this creative space. We're working with subjective emotions and feelings towards these things. But our role is really in-house and agency. It's, really to be able to connect the dots to our audience. And so that's where the job really gets difficult, but it's also a really exciting challenge. And I think it's why so many of us are in this space.
Very, very well put. I think we're all problem solvers, and that is one of the highs that at least I get, right? When you're backed into a corner, there's all these constraints. And then the team thinks of an idea that like literally checks those boxes, but does it in such a creative and engaging way. And
Yeah.
it's like high fives everywhere, right? Because you're like, yeah, like,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
got it. So I think, yeah, that's really well put. And us as creatives, we're problem solvers at heart, and I think we're always fight the good fight. Well, Kristen, this was such an amazing conversation, and I guess to wrap things up, um, we talked about AI. We talked about how basically it can't create soul and authenticity, and that's why having creative leaders like yourself is just so important. So what's your kind of lasting advice to our listeners to just continue to cultivate this? And as I just kind of said, like fight the good fight of like, making sure that we're thinking of the outcomes, we're thinking of the audience. And then there's the taste, that creative element that binds that all together and makes that lovely wedding cake that we all want to take a bite out of?
I think it's two things. I think for creatives, it's algorithms. They can replicate patterns, but they can't replicate perspective. And so that perspective is yours to cultivate. And so as you're doing that, number two is respect your audience, protect your taste, and above all, stay curious. That's really the curiosity is what's going to continue to break you through to the next level.
All right, Kristen. Well, thank you so much for joining the show. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Lydia, for having me. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to the Audience Connection podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect with me about how I can help you tell better stories and connect better with your audiences, drop me a note, lydia@casualfilms.com. We'll be back with more episodes soon. See you next time.